They said the CEO's daughter would never walk, and when the doctors said it, they didn't whisper it gently or soften it with hope, they said it the way people say final things, with their eyes already moving on, their hands already reaching for the next chart, the next patient, the next life that still had something left to give. The room smelled like disinfectant and despair, a white box where dreams were quietly pronounced dead, and standing in that room was Victor Hale, a man who owned skyscrapers, factories, entire city blocks, a man whose signature could move markets, yet in that moment he was smaller than he had ever been, shrinking beneath the weight of words that no amount of money could undo. On the hospital bed lay his daughter, Lily, 8 years old, her legs still, her eyes too old for her face, watching every adult in the room as if she already understood that something precious had been taken from her before she even knew how to protect it. The accident had been brutal, a twisted intersection, a drunk driver, metal screaming against metal, and while Victor's driver had escaped with bruises, Lily's spine had not been so lucky. Months of surgeries, months of therapy, months of the best doctors flown in from around the world had ended here, in this room, with this sentence: permanent damage, no neurological response, no realistic chance of walking again. Victor nodded, thanked them with a numb politeness that came from years of boardrooms and bad news, but inside something broke in a way that couldn't be repaired. Lily didn't cry. She just looked at her father and asked in a quiet voice that cut deeper than any scream, "Does that mean I'll always need help?" And Victor, the man who had never failed to fix anything in his life, had no answer. Miles away from that sterile hospital wing, in a small apartment where the paint peeled and the pipes knocked like tired bones, another man was waking up before dawn, tying his worn shoes, and gently kissing his sleeping son's forehead. Daniel Carter was a single dad, widowed 3 years ago, raising his 6-year-old boy, Noah, on a janitor's salary. His mornings were a choreography of survival, packing lunches, checking homework, tying shoelaces, and reminding Noah that his dad loved him more than anything in the world. Daniel worked nights at the same hospital where Victor Hale's daughter lay, pushing a cleaning cart through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and sorrow, invisible to most, acknowledged only by messes and spills. He didn't mind the invisibility. It kept him focused, kept his thoughts from wandering to the emptiness at home where a wife should have been. Daniel had learned that life didn't always ask for permission before taking things away, and the only choice you had afterward was how you showed up for what remained. On this particular night, as he mopped the floors outside the pediatric wing, he noticed the tension in the air, the way nurses spoke softer, the way security stood straighter, the way power announced itself without needing to say a word. He didn't know it yet, but his life and the life of the most powerful man in the city were about to collide in the quietest, most unexpected way. Victor began spending his nights in the hospital after that day, sitting beside Lily's bed long after visiting hours ended, staring at her legs as if sheer will could make them move. He brought her gifts every day, toys, books, gadgets, anything money could buy, but Lily smiled politely and pushed them aside. What she wanted couldn't be wrapped. She watched other children in the therapy room learn to take steps, some stumbling, some crying, some laughing, and she clapped for them with genuine joy, then turned away when no one was looking, her hands clenched into fists. Victor saw that look one night and felt something twist inside him. He had built an empire by never accepting no, by pushing past limits, by finding angles no one else could see, yet here he was, helpless, watching his daughter accept a fate he refused to believe in. He demanded more tests, more opinions, more experts. Some humored him, some avoided him, but the answers never changed. Medicine had done what it could. Hope, they implied, was now optional. Daniel noticed Lily before he ever noticed Victor. It was impossible not to. She was always awake when he passed by, always watching the hallway as if waiting for something. One night, as Daniel cleaned the glass doors near her room, Lily caught his eye and waved. Daniel hesitated, then waved back, feeling slightly ridiculous but also strangely warmed by the simple human connection. The next night, she asked him his name. "Daniel," he said, pointing to his badge. She told him hers and asked about his son. Daniel, unused to being asked about his life by anyone in this building, found himself talking, just a little, about Noah, about how he loved dinosaurs and hated vegetables. Lily laughed, a real laugh, the kind that fills a room and reminds you that joy can still exist even when everything feels broken. Victor watched these exchanges from the corner of the room, initially annoyed that a janitor was distracting his daughter, then confused when he saw Lily's mood lift after these brief conversations in a way no doctor or therapist had managed. He told himself it was nothing, just a child craving novelty, but he kept watching. One evening, Daniel arrived at work exhausted, his mind heavy with bills and worries, his heart aching because Noah had asked earlier that day why his mom never came back. As he pushed his cart past Lily's room, he noticed something that made him stop cold. Lily was trying to move her toes. It was subtle, barely visible, but Daniel saw it because he had spent years watching small things, details other people overlooked. Lily's face was strained with concentration, her jaw clenched, her brow furrowed, and when her toes twitched, just the slightest movement, her eyes widened with surprise and fear, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to hope. Daniel stepped closer without thinking. "Do that again," he said softly. Lily tried, harder this time, but nothing happened. Tears welled up in her eyes. Daniel crouched down to her level, his voice calm, steady, the same tone he used when Noah was scared. "Sometimes our bodies whisper before they speak," he said. "It doesn't mean they're done talking." Victor stood abruptly, demanding to know what Daniel thought he was doing, but Daniel didn't flinch. He simply explained what he had seen. The room went quiet. A nurse was called. Tests were ordered. The results were inconclusive, but something had changed, not in Lily's legs, but in the air. For the first time since the accident, hope wasn't coming from a doctor or a machine. It was coming from a man with a mop in his hand and a tired kindness in his eyes. Victor dismissed Daniel that night, apologizing stiffly, promising himself he wouldn't cling to false hope. But he couldn't forget the way Lily had looked when Daniel spoke to her, the way her shoulders had relaxed, the way her fear had softened. Over the next weeks, Daniel was reassigned to different floors, a quiet request from Victor who told himself it was for the best. Lily noticed immediately. She asked for Daniel. Victor made excuses. Her laughter faded again. One night, unable to bear it, Victor ordered security to let Daniel back onto the pediatric wing. When Daniel returned, Lily's smile lit up the room, and Victor felt a sting of something unfamiliar in his chest. Gratitude, maybe. Or the beginning of humility. Daniel never promised miracles. He never spoke of cures. He just talked to Lily, encouraged her, told her stories about Noah learning to ride a bike and falling over and getting back up again, over and over, until one day he didn't fall anymore. "Bodies remember," Daniel would say. "They just need time and patience and someone who believes in them." Victor listened, silently, wondering when he had stopped believing in anything that couldn't be measured or controlled. As days turned into weeks, something extraordinary began to happen. Lily's therapists noticed tiny improvements. Muscle responses. Flickers of sensation. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make headlines, but enough to confuse the doctors who had already written their conclusions. Victor funded additional therapy, experimental programs, anything that could support this fragile progress. Through it all, Daniel remained a quiet constant, never asking for credit, never asking for money, just showing up, night after night, reminding Lily that she was more than a diagnosis. Victor began to see Daniel not as a janitor, but as a father, and in that reflection, he saw his own failures more clearly than any boardroom critique. He had provided everything except presence, everything except belief. And as he watched his daughter try, struggle, and refuse to give up, inspired by a man who had nothing to gain, Victor realized that power wasn't in money or influence. It was in showing up when hope was fragile and choosing to protect it anyway, and this was only the beginning. The first time Lily stood between the parallel bars, the room went silent in a way that felt sacred, like even the machines knew they should not interrupt what was about to happen. Her legs trembled violently, thin and pale from months of stillness, her fingers gripping the cold metal so tightly her knuckles turned white, and every doctor in the room wore the same guarded expression, the one that said they had seen hope rise before only to watch it collapse again. Victor stood at the back, his hands clenched, his breath shallow, afraid to move, afraid to believe, afraid that even a heartbeat might be enough to shatter this fragile moment. Daniel stood closer, not touching her, not interfering, just there, his presence steady and unshakable, the way he had stood beside his son the first time Noah tried to ride a bike without training wheels, knowing that falling was part of learning, and that fear only grew louder when no one stood beside you. Lily took a breath, slow and deliberate, the way Daniel had taught her, and for a split second, just a split second, her weight shifted onto her feet. It wasn't a step. It wasn't even standing, not really. But it was defiance. It was her body saying, "I'm still here." And in that instant, Victor felt tears spill down his face without warning, because something inside him finally broke free from the prison of certainty and control. He realized then that miracles didn't announce themselves with trumpets. They whispered. And you had to be quiet enough to hear them. Progress was slow, painfully slow, the kind of slow that tested faith every single day. Some mornings Lily woke up exhausted before therapy even began. Some days her legs refused to cooperate at all, and frustration boiled over into anger and tears that left her hoarse and shaking. The doctors cautioned Victor constantly, reminding him that neurological improvements could plateau, that expectations needed to be managed, that disappointment could be more damaging than hope. Victor nodded, agreed, thanked them, then went back to Lily's room and told her he was proud of her no matter what happened. For the first time in his life, he meant it without conditions. Daniel watched these changes quietly, noticing how Victor no longer checked his phone during conversations, how he canceled meetings without hesitation, how he learned how to braid Lily's hair with clumsy fingers and laughed when he failed. Power had taught Victor how to command rooms. Love was teaching him how to stay. Daniel's own life, however, was unraveling at the seams. His hours were cut. His rent was overdue. Noah's school called about a field trip fee Daniel couldn't afford. Some nights Daniel sat alone in his apartment after Noah fell asleep, staring at the wall, wondering if doing the right thing always had to hurt so much. He never told Victor. He never told Lily. He showed up anyway. Because when Lily took even the smallest step forward, it felt like proof that endurance mattered, that staying mattered, that sometimes the good you planted in someone else's life bloomed in ways you might never see in your own. One night, after a particularly brutal therapy session that left Lily sobbing and inconsolable, Daniel knelt beside her and told her something he had never told anyone else. He told her about the night his wife died, about how the doctors had told him she was gone before he even reached the hospital, about how he had stood in that same hallway where Lily now learned to walk and thought his life was over. But it wasn't, he said softly. It just changed shape. Lily listened, her tears slowing, her breathing evening out. "Maybe walking is just my new shape," she whispered. Daniel smiled through his own tears. Exactly. The breakthrough came on a day no one expected it, a day with no special preparations, no extra doctors flown in, no cameras, no announcements. Lily was exhausted. Daniel was late. Victor was on a call he couldn't cancel. Therapy began anyway. Lily stood between the bars, her face set with determination that seemed too heavy for such a small body. She remembered Daniel's words. She remembered her father's hands braiding her hair. She remembered the way people had spoken about her like she wasn't in the room. And then she moved. One foot slid forward, shaky and unsure, then the other followed, dragging slightly, imperfect, ungraceful, but undeniably real. A step. An actual step. The therapist gasped. A nurse dropped her clipboard. Victor's phone fell from his hand as he turned, just in time to see his daughter standing on her own, tears streaming down her face, smiling like the sun had finally broken through a storm that had lasted forever. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "I did it." Victor crossed the room in seconds and dropped to his knees, pulling her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, repeating her name like a prayer. Daniel stood in the doorway, unnoticed, his chest tight, his vision blurred, knowing that this moment didn't belong to him, and yet feeling like it was the greatest gift he had ever received. The story didn't stay in that room. It couldn't. Word spread. Doctors asked questions. Specialists reviewed scans again and again. The narrative shifted from never to rare, from impossible to unexplained. Victor was asked to fund research, to give interviews, to put his name on a miracle. He refused every offer that didn't include Daniel. When reporters asked who deserved the credit, Victor told them the truth. A single dad who believed when the rest of us stopped listening. The internet exploded. People wanted to know Daniel's story, his methods, his background. They expected credentials, degrees, secrets. All they found was a tired father who had learned the hard way that love didn't need permission to be powerful.
Victor paid Daniel's debts without being asked. He funded Noah's education. He offered Daniel a position running a foundation for children with spinal injuries, not because Daniel had medical expertise, but because he understood something no textbook could teach: how to sit with pain without turning away. Months later, Lily walked onto a stage with a slight limp and a radiant smile, holding her father's hand on one side and Daniel's on the other. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. But what mattered happened afterward, in a quiet moment when Lily hugged Daniel tightly and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Daniel hugged her back and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me why we don't." Victor watched them and finally understood what real wealth looked like. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't power. It was presence. It was patience. It was believing in a whisper when the world only listened to shouts. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that hope can come from the most unexpected places, subscribe to the channel now, because there are more stories like this, stories that prove kindness, faith, and perseverance can still change lives.